Okay, welcome everyone. Tonight we're going to do a little mental exercise with physics that doesn't yet exist. We're going to discuss interdimensional transportation. I expect it to be interactive, so if people have comments or questions, that would be great. Otherwise, I went through as many of if we had this, what would be the side effects? What would be the problems? How would it cause grief for everything? And that kind of stuff. So that's really what we're going to focus on, is not whether or not it's possible, but if it were possible, what would it affect? But first, we'll go over the news. For people who think that we don't do astronomy stuff, that we do all sorts of other stuff, I put into the email that I sent out astronomical event positions and setting times and stuff like that. And I get all of those from the Old Farmer's Almanac online. Doesn't cost anything. They'd like you to watch all their advertisements and subscribe to something, but I don't, and it's not a requirement. But you can key into the web link the actual location. So if you put down like Fort Lauderdale, Broward County, Florida, and then you punch in a date, it'll create up here. You can see the URL. It creates a URL with that information in it. You can strip off the date and then just save that as a link. And whenever you punch it up from your favorites, it'll always tell you like, what's the sunrise and sunset for Fort Lauderdale? So you don't have to keep looking up the location. It doesn't require a login or to give them your email address or any of that sort of stuff. So you can get all sorts of astronomy things, moon phase calendar stuff. Plus, it's got a full moon call.
It's good, so revolutionary.
So next up is about the time we're starting. There was an in the queue ahead. They launched an Aaron satellite, was communications company, and the other was defense. Hey, that looks a lot larger than your big panels are all folded up down here. But NASA, well, it looks like Boeing's going to have problems well into next year. Could you open up to making launch vehicles and caps? Yes, they're tired of and Russia.
As Russia and China were going nuclear too.
Yeah, another company other than SpaceX to just have some multiplicity going on, especially with Boeing being so delayed. And it's kind of weird. They put up, you can make subsystems. We just need fresh commercial talent involved. And they gave them a deadline of, by middle of next year, you need to have this stuff operational, which means it has to be equipment that's already in test. And there's only one company that's at that stage. Okay, the Boeing we don't want, please leave the room. And then the next commercial vendor that walks in the door is Boeing, because they're the farthest along. And by no sooner than February 12th of next year, Artemis program, which is NASA's Return to the Moon program, is going to be launching a test flight using the Orion capsule. And the capsule is going to be launched without people in it. It's just going to have some dead weight to simulate the mass of astronauts. And it's only going into Earth orbit. I'm not sure that it's even docking with the ISS, given how the nose is set up. It doesn't look like there's a hatch there to dock with the ISS. So my guess is this is an uncrewed orbital test flight just to see if they can do it, because so far they've had all sorts of software and propulsion problems to get it into orbit where they want it. And if you're following the volcano La Palma in the Canary Islands, they had a problem with the volcano. One side of the main cone collapsed. So there's so much, it didn't explode outward, it collapsed. So there's so much lava coming up out of this volcano that it cooked the rock underneath the sidewall of the volcano cone, and the volcano cone collapsed into the lava. Now, I don't know if it collapsed on the side that would say tsunami to the Atlantic towards us or not, but given that it didn't landslide down the hill, it collapsed into the cone, I don't think there's a tsunami problem. Besides that, if there was one, we probably would know by now that it's on its way. But if you want to
take maybe 8 hours, but they're saying a mega tsunami is not likely at this point.
Well, that's what I was saying. Since it collapsed into the cone and didn't slide like a landslide down the sidewall of the cone, I don't think there's going to be a tsunami from this. But if you want to watch it, follow it, and see some videos that are directly from the people that are the scientists investigating it. These are volcanologists in the Canaries. You can follow their Facebook page. or just
Mhm.
observe it whenever you want. And I will put that in the
Thank
Chatify. If you've been paying my attention to my repeated announcements that Lake Powell and Lake Mead have got a problem, and it's a serious one. I found a video on YouTube from a site called Every News, and it's a video made by boaters that actually take boats, have been doing so for a long time, out on Lake Powell and Lake Mead. And there were places where there used to be channels to take you from one part of Lake Powell to another, and the water level has dropped more than 150 feet. And the channels are now either mud beds or sitting several feet of rock above the water level. So if you want to get from this side of the lake to that side of the lake, you now have to go the long way around, which they're saying is an almost 80-mile trip. And you have to carry extra gasoline in your boat in order to do that. Otherwise, you won't make the trip from sort of where you get into Lake Powell to where you want to be. And the other thing they're saying is that it's getting difficult for big boats to launch on Lake Powell and Lake Mead because the boat slips, the concrete ramps, even if you get to the bottom end of the concrete ramp, it's still a good 20-foot drop down to the water level.
Yeah.
So,
That's crazy.
Yeah. And of course, everybody says, well, if those people in California would stop drinking water and using it to grow almonds, like you do know there's a drought. You do know that the ice and snow that would normally be to the north that would replenish the lake isn't there anymore. So where are you expecting to get all the water to replenish it? Even if California immediately didn't take any more water from it, it would continue to decline based upon evaporation. Pay attention to it because at some point the water level will get so low that they'll be drawing silt into the hydroelectric power generators, and they'll have to shut off the power generation, which would affect 5 or 6 states on the West Coast. California is rapidly expanding all their solar, so it would be more of an impact to Utah and Nevada and Arizona than it would be to California at this point. And if you remember last week, we had discussions of this Sophia thing that Helen went on. Is there any information for that? Yes, there is. And it's on a NASA website. And there's a Smiley from 2014 right there. There's Nathan. Nathan was a teacher in this area, and the opportunities kind of dried up, so he moved to a different state. And these two are from Wisconsin. So
he's in Houston.
He's in Houston, Planet Houston. If you remember from the old Superman movie, when Zod came to the moon and asked the astronaut, "Where are you from?" And the astronaut says, "Houston." And then Zod says, "Planet Houston?" So, old movie joke. Anyway, if you want to find out more information about the Sophia flight, including videos, and there she is in the video. That's in the email. Recent launches of people in commercial space programs and such. So we don't have to go over these pages, duration, and which is orbital and which is not orbital. I just went and found the information. If you know what you're asking for, the information is there. You can find it from both news media as well as the companies themselves. Space on the site. NASA has information. Captain Sabine, but she has when Captain Kirk, if atomic level, you at the destination. And then there were questions as to what is the Kármán line, what is the Armstrong line, and at what point.
I love this picture.
Yeah, at what point humans can't exist.
Humans.
Yeah, we're way down here. Down below Mount Everest is where there's not enough oxygen for you to live. You'd suffer from hypoxia in a matter of minutes, pass out, and without oxygen, you'd die. So very low altitude is where humans have a problem. But when you get up higher, let me flip over to the other one, to the Armstrong Line or the Armstrong Limit, this is where the atmospheric pressure is sufficiently low that the blood in your body will boil. If you're a baker, you know that if you bake a cake at a sea level altitude, it takes a certain amount of time. But if you bake the same cake and you're baking it at, Denver altitude, you have to adjust your baking duration because the liquid in the cake is going to bubble up and boil faster because of the lower air pressure at just a 5,000 foot difference. So the Armstrong line is the one where you really don't want to be. That requires a pressure suit and oxygen. And then how high Sophia's 747 actually went. I found an interesting thing here that Sophia's ceiling is 45,000 feet. But if you talk to the pilots, the 747 should be able to get you up to 50,000 feet. But if you go over to the Boeing website and you say, what is the certified ceiling for a 747 SP? This is the same airplane, but without the hole in the side and without the multi-tonnage
17 tons.
It's 45,000. No, it's 45,100 feet. So the difference between Sophia's official ceiling and the 747 SP's official ceiling is 100 feet. I found
The
that
interesting thing is that when you start doing the research is when it hits the 40,000 feet limit, they open the telescope. So
Yeah.
it takes some time to go and climb. And then when it gets around, it starts lower and it's go higher and higher as there is less weight because it's burning combustible.
Yes, and the air inside the chamber where the telescope is located needs to be evacuated before they open the door, because you would have an outrush of air that would vibrate the telescope. So you have to have vents to slowly, as you're increasing altitude above about 37,000 feet, to vent out any existing air from the telescope chamber before you open the door. I love the minutia.
The 747 SP, I believe, is a slightly shorter version than the standard 747.
Yes.
I don't
Yes.
know if they use the same engines or not.
Yes, it's exactly the same engines,
Yep.
exactly the same, like the equipment is almost the same. The only huge difference is the size of the airplane. That's why it's good for cargo and it's good for long duration flights, because it's a lighter and it's also, needs smaller, it's like less weight to carry. So it can, 0.7 Mach.
Yeah, the stretch version is the 747-400, and it does not carry 400 people. That's just the number they came up with. It's longer so that the airlines can make more money off the jet. It will not fly as high or as fast or as far because the fuel tank size is the same and the engines are the same. They just wanted to be able to carry more people across the United States or from one point in Europe to another. But the Airbus right now, I believe, is the one that will take you from Toronto to, I think it's Sydney, Australia, on a nonstop flight. But they don't carry as many people when they do that.
The SP can fly about safely 10 hours straight.
That's a typical don't pressure luck kind of Sophia flight, is about 10 hours. So
And then
it can
1 hour to go, 1 hour to come back.
Yes. So you get about 8 hours of scientific research once you get up to altitude. But when they're in California, they come out of Armstrong Flight Center in Southern California. They fly up the coast of California and either go east or west at Canada and then turn around and come back down. The hole is only on the side of the plane. So if they want to look out at something to the east, they catch that on the way up. And if they want to look out at something to the west, they catch that on the way back. North and south, they do the same thing, but as they cross into Canada and then out over the Pacific. And then here's where I was talking about just basic pressurization of cabins. And then if people wanted to see it, I have the YouTube link here to the final scene of the movie 2010 from like 2001, the sequel 2010, where they were igniting the Odyssey rocket engines as they were leaving Jupiter. And that's when the landlord said, hey, stay away from Europa, it's mine. You can watch that video for those that want it. Now, the funny thing here is it says 2011, but the movie's 2010, but it was actually released in 1988.
So we were supposed already to have be visiting space.
Oh yeah, we were supposed to have already encountered the landlord at Jupiter by now. The person that I was suggesting for going into space as the most noteworthy science-minded kind of individual to fly on a SpaceX mission would be Tim Russ, who played Tuvok, the Vulcan, on the Star Trek Voyager series. Now, he does more than just talk about astronomy. He was a member of a 5-person team to do the latest coordinate updates of Patroclus, which is one of the Trojan asteroids that Lucy's going to go watch.
Have you read the book versus the movie at 2001 and 2010?
No, I didn't want to ruin the movie by reading the book.
Okay, the book explains the ending. Well, this is not a spoiler, but in the first one, 2001, they're stuck around, I think it was Io. And then in the second, Io, in the second book, he was around Iapetus. So he completely switched planets in the second book.
Well, Europa has got a higher probability of life being on it because of its salty ocean. But there are a number of moons around Jupiter and Saturn that have reasonable probability of some form of life. But we won't know until we get out there. But when you pay for the rights to the book, you also pay for the ability to change anything you want for, what's better in the movies.
I think in the book, he changed the planet. He was near Jupiter in the 2001 and 2010, he's around Saturn.
Oh, that's
And in the
interesting.
book itself, he changed it, yeah.
That's interesting. Well, Jupiter does have a lot of radiation, but then so does Saturn, but Jupiter has more. So,
the moons around, I said around the planet, I meant the moons.
yeah.
I think the Iapetus was the moon around Saturn, and that's where they were. But in the first book, they were around, you said it was Io. Doesn't Carl Sagan call it Io? We know what moon it is. However you say, we know what moon it is.
Yes. It's the one
Well,
that's
if you
spelled
pronounce in
I-O.
Greek, it's Io, but in English, people normally say Io.
Don't get me started on aluminum.
Aluminium.
Uh-huh.
Or my worst one, Magalhães.
You mean Magellan?
Magalhães.
Uh-huh. I just pronounce them like I see them. So tonight we're going to discuss something that there is no technology for it currently. I don't know of any physics that would be supportive of it right now. So we're just doing a thought experiment. And if you think that everything that has a beginning is immediately successful and will take over the world, I suggest watching this particular YouTube video.
I love this guy. I watch a lot of videos from him.
Yeah, Matt Farrell does a good job. And most of the videos that he does are well produced. And he's actually got, big money sponsors. So, but he picked 5 different things that when they first came out and were starting to get some traction in society, there were noteworthy people that said, this is going nowhere. You'll never make this practical. It'll never be cost effective. Why would you ever want one? And these were some of the noteworthy people at the time that were taken very seriously. Why would you think that Michael Dell, one of the guys that created Dell computers back in the day, would actually make the statement, I'm selling these computers to business users. I don't know why any home user would ever want a computer. Really? Or the guy that invented the Motorola cell phone believed that they'll always be too expensive and the power levels would be too low and the coverage would be too insufficient to ever expect the average person to make use of a cell phone. So, all you need is business to get behind it, and you get it smaller, cheaper, faster, more and more capable until the maximum amount of money can be made from it. And then, okay, that's about where it plateaus. So there's 5 things that in the early days that were debunked as, nope, not going to happen. and now they're just taken for granted, like flying an
Well,
airplane.
you could start from Michael Faraday. This is just a show experiment. It will never use electricity.
Yes, yes. Even Faraday believed that electricity was just for demonstration of physics principles, and it'll never
No,
be
I
practical.
think it wasn't him. It was people around him.
No, he was one. It's like Lavoisier. Lavoisier came up with this thing called a microscope, and it was just a party treat. He didn't believe it was going to be useful for anything until those little wiggly things in the water that everybody was drinking turned out to be stuff you need to pay attention to. Anyway, if you think that what is going to be discussed tonight is something that will never happen, I would invite you to watch this video. And that's all I've got for the news. Any comments, questions, any stories I might have missed?
So the last thing that I actually post on my personal page, it was that Mars had a lot of videos from Curiosity, including the ones with sound. Because I arrived late, I don't know if you commented already. It was like, if you go on Perseverance, you can, because you can actually have an idea where the sound comes from, because it's a stereo. It does have one microphone on a mast and another microphone on a body. So you can actually see where the sound is coming from, and that they have like a sound cloud kind of a file that you can hear the sounds, and they advise you to actually use the earphones so you can have an idea like how would sound for you to walk around Mars. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I was back when they first did this, about a month after Perseverance landed. I did some looking into it and found out that they just, it's kind of I won't say last minute, but it was a late minute thought to add the microphones, because microphones do have a data stream that somewhere they have to capture the digital audio and then send it back to Earth. But
yes, they actually mentioned that as a store-bought microphone.
Yeah, but the problem they ran into was vibration. Given the lower atmospheric pressure on Mars, the higher frequencies are attenuated and the lower frequencies are enhanced or more distinct. And they didn't count on the grills over the microphones to reverberate. So when you listen to the audio, you get a lot of that sort of stuff. That's not Mars. That's actually the grills on the microphone vibrating given the lower atmospheric pressure. People think of a microphone as it's a small diaphragm that vibrates very quickly, but the cover on the front of it to keep debris out of it, I won't say spit guard because it's not fabric, it's actually metal. It's a crossed grill. The grill vibrates because the frequency range is towards the bottom end, and instead of it picking up sound through the grill, that if it's high frequency would just pass through the grill, the lower frequency actually makes the grill vibrate. But yes, there's two microphones. There's one on the mast, so it can directionally point for a sound source, and then there's one down low on the body of the rover, so they can get kind of a stereo effect between the two of them. So if they point the mast one direction and the rover's body's pointing the other direction, they can see the directional effect of the sound. And to follow up something we were discussing last week, where's the real problem with the backlog of cargo containers at the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of San Diego. And a thought struck me this week is they're saying there seems to be an imbalance. They seem to be able to get containers onto these 1,000+ container ships and get them to the Port of Los Angeles and to the Port of San Diego, and then the port doesn't have the capacity to unload them rapidly enough. So wherever these ships are coming from, they seem to have the ability to very quickly load up these ships. And it's only when they get to Los Angeles or San Diego that all of a sudden they can't unload them anywhere near as fast as they get loaded. So there's an imbalance there.
They got another problem now too
What's
is that
that?
they have some serious storms over there, and they're losing. They lost 40 of the cargo containers so far off the ship, and they expect to lose some more.
Well, they're not strapped on. I mean, they're multiple stories above the deck of the ship, and they're not strapped on. So if the ship tilts too far, yeah, the containers are just gonna fall off. And
Mhm.
if you look at one of those ships have around 1,000 of these containers on a single ship. These are the Panamax size ships. So if they lose 100 containers, they've got an inventory of the containers that they sent. They'll just send more containers. Hopefully what you had ordered was not a one of a kind thing that you're not going to get another one, you know. But you know, if a ship that has 1,000 containers loses 100 containers, that's not really a slowdown issue. If the containers aren't on the ship when it gets to Los Angeles, that actually makes it take less time to unload them. So I'm not buying the natural course of events that is the source of this slowdown. I think that they're kind of creating their own demise, and that if you don't have enough drivers for the trucks, the companies that you're driving for, if they can't find other drivers, they're going to be more likely to look into electric trucks that are driven autonomously. So
that's already legal in the state of Florida right now.
Yes, and in California.
But they're trying to rush through the people passing the commercial driver's license CDL things, but then you have the various tests for hazardous waste and so on.
Well, the companies that charge you for the instruction to learn how to get your CDL and how to, you know, haul freight around, those companies have been raising their prices, which is counter to getting more drivers. So what they're doing is they're raising the price and they're trying to compress the amount of education you're going to get, which is probably going to increase damage to freight and accidents. So I see it as you've got this system that is designing itself for its own demise. So as soon as Tesla starts building autonomous semis out of California and Fremont and Nevada and Texas, and they're expecting to, between those three plants, churn out at least 24 trucks per week. That's 24 semis. That's not the actual containers or the trailers. That's just the tractors. So if they can turn them out at that rate, given 6 months or so, you're going to start to see some of these problems going away, and the drivers and the trucking companies that don't convert over are not going to know what hit them.
Yeah, that's true. Well, they said that's going to be one of the industries that are going to lose a lot of jobs in the future, and it's unfortunately one of the highest paying jobs for somebody that just has a high school diploma.
Yes, I've got a brother-in-law that went through that. He went into the Coast Guard, and then when he came out of the Coast Guard, he needed a trade, so he became a trucker. And when his body started saying, "You can't do this anymore," he stepped down to a FedEx ground driver. And then when South Florida traffic just became a nightmare, and he had a couple of accidents where he had to cover the cost of the vehicle because you were a contractor. So you were providing the vehicle for FedEx use. And when 2 accidents happened on 95 in less than 3 years, neither of which were his fault, but it totaled the truck, his insurance went up so high that he just said, "I can't do this anymore." So he started doing compliance deliveries for FedEx. Now, what this is if you've ever been inside of one of these giant freight depots, you'll find that things often fall off the belts. And when they fall off the belts, they don't worry about it. They'll come back every week or so and grab up all the boxes off the ground and ship them. Or if they have boxes that the drivers can't deliver, they'll just bundle them all up and have these compliance drivers go do the legwork, find out where the actual destination is and deliver it. And, they'll pay him much more per package than the actual delivery drivers. So I was always helping my brother-in-law out to find things that could not be easily found on maps. Like
It's a telescope
It-
in the making.
Hey, I saw something interesting this week. I had an Amazon package delivered at 7 a.m. this morning. And I thought, my God, delivering at night is a great idea because there's no traffic.
Well, I've got it even better than that. 5 minutes from my house is the new Fort Lauderdale headquarters of Amazon.
Where
There
is
were-
that?
It's the street just north of Cypress Creek, between 12th and 15th Avenues.
Oh, wow. I
They
heard they
built
want to
some-
put,
They
place
built
in
they built some enormous industrial commercial buildings in there, and I thought they were going to lease them out separately. And all of a sudden, they build this enormous overhang to protect them from the weather. And I thought, well, somebody's got some money. And then I was driving
Mhm.
the back street a week ago and noticed that there were first one Amazon driver on that street, and then three, and then a lot more. And I came by the building and they were just lined up, all brand new Amazon blue trucks,
Wow.
a big Amazon smile on the side of the building. And I went, that's interesting. And then I saw a sign that just said the actual station identifier. I think it's DFL-1, Direct Fort Lauderdale Station 1 or something like that. And so I went on the website and I looked it up, and sure enough, yep, the big industrial building is their new Fort Lauderdale area warehouse. I guess they still have one in Sunrise, but this is Fort Lauderdale area. And then
Yeah.
the commercial building just 90 degrees to that, which is about 2/3 that size, is the new Fort Lauderdale business office for Amazon. So
Oh, wow.
they're hiring a lot here
Well-
in Fort Lauderdale.
Well, I heard they wanted to put some big place down in this area somewhere because of the South American trade.
Oh yeah. Well, they have a Miami complex as well, and there's a lot of South American and Central American trade down through there.
Very interesting.
I like to watch these things. It's process in action.
Yeah. Well, I think the next area of interest would be the new recycling plant they want to put in that for Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach to have their own recycling thing because
Is this going
Yeah,
to be the picky, choosy recycling? Like, oh, we can't recycle that. We don't make enough money off of it.
I don't know.
Yeah, I find that really fascinating that you're in the recycling business and there's stuff that you kick back because it's not worth your while to recycle it.
I hear that.
How are you going to get rid of stuff like that? Somebody's got to process it. You can't just dump it all in the landfill. That's what they've been doing.
Well, I'm sitting here stripping wires and motors right now, so I'm doing
Yep.
my bit.
You're getting your copper out of it.
Yep.
So I have an update on my converting the astronomy telescope, converting the surveillance camera into an astronomy telescope. The manufacturer was giving me no response. So I went and looked on the inside of the camera because the camera has multiple circuit boards and modules inside. So I started looking and seeing who makes this and who makes that, and is there a part number on it? Can I find any information on the website? And the key component that the camera chip is on one side of the board and there's a computer chip on the other side of the board, and it's a packaged component. So the camera chip with the computer and the software to implement the open standard interface to connect to the network, all of that is on one modular circuit board that the camera packager that I bought the camera from off of Amazon, those are the people that are not responding to me. But the actual people that make the board, they've got all kinds of information out on the internet. So I just started reading all that stuff and I went, okay, so now we're getting to it. So I took the information from their site and then I started writing a little Python program to command the camera directly. No web browser needed. Command the camera directly to, I need this information. I need to know the manufacturer, the model number, the serial number, the firmware version, all that stuff. And it said, you issue the right command, we give you the right data. So I was getting all this data back, and I found that if I manually initiate a focusing operation or a zoom operation, it will stop the autofocus. There's no turn off autofocus. There's just, if you manually tweak it, the auto stuff switches off until you do another zoom or iris change. So I found a way to turn off the autofocus, so that's helpful. I can do it manually now. The second one is the infrared illuminator LEDs. I need a way to turn those off. And there's actually a sequence called auxiliary commands. Think of high-end commercial surveillance cameras like you'd see on the highway. They have windshield wipers on them to keep the lens clean. That's not directly in this open standard. It's in one of the auxiliary commands, as is being able to turn off the LEDs. So that's where I'm going to try next, probably tomorrow, is commanding it to arbitrarily turn off the LEDs. Because I went through the web interface to tell it, turn off the LEDs, and it turned off the LEDs. But then as soon as I tweaked anything, it turned the LEDs back on. Or if I turned off the LEDs and then I changed the ambient lighting in the room, if I changed it from light to dark, it turned the LEDs back on. So I'm still playing with it, but I am making progress.
Yay.
So as soon as I get a couple of more of these things knocked out, maybe about a dozen commands left to go. If I get the XML script for sending those commands, now I can start writing the actual astronomy software drivers and have hope of it actually doing something meaningful. So
Cool.
So I'm seeing a lot more videos informationally about the James Webb Space Telescope now that it's made its way down to South America and will be hopefully launched on December 18th. And I'm grabbing information from wherever I can get it and updating the presentation. The Space Telescope Science Institute, in conjunction with NASA, came out with an updated media kit or press release kit. And there were a bunch of new diagrams and information in there. So I sucked in all that information and regurgitated it out and made updates to the presentation. And I sent a copy off to my subject matter expert. But apparently he's, I guess, frying other fish. He's no longer out of the office, gone somewhere. I'm going to guess that he actually went to South America for the arrival of the telescope as an assistant to help check things out, because he's down low in the food chain. And here, you go to South America. I, the professional astronomer and program administrator, I don't need to go down there. So, but he seems to be back in the office. But I think he's catching up on stuff that he missed out on while he was gone. And presentations, this is the last one for which I have off the top of my head and prepared content. So we have a couple of more weeks before the James Webb presentation on December 11th. So I've got to think of some new topics. So I will either come up with something or people can suggest things. And with that, anything before we get started with tonight's presentation. So this is going to be an interactive discussion. I watched on the Disney Plus streaming service, Marvel's What If, which is all about what if something went differently? What if what you expect didn't happen, and what you didn't expect happened? And so I said, well, why don't we start playing around with that and see how the audience responds to it? So I said, what if the physics and technology associated with interdimensional travel were to be solved on short notice? How would having access to this capability change things? I know it's currently considered impossible, but then so in the past was breaking the sound barrier, rockets, human travel to the moon, airplanes, and personal computers. Like I said, go back and watch that 5 debunked things video. So consider this just to be a thought experiment or a mental exercise on what might change if this capability were suddenly available.
A debunking experiment.
Yes, yes. So I'm aware, yes, it's not currently possible. It breaks the laws of physics as we currently know them. Yes, I know. Sounds like a bad idea. Why would we ever want to do this? This is a mental exercise. As the saying goes, let's see how bad can get. Do you know how many people that would put out of work? Well, yeah, we're going to consider that. Do you know how many businesses that would go under? Yeah, we're going to consider that too. Do you know how basically governments would lose their shit if this started to happen? They wouldn't be able to control it. Well, we'll talk about that as well. But first, you've got to bring an open mind. And I included in the presentation that 5 tech innovations that changed the world. So promoting Mike Farrell's. I keep getting, is it Matt Farrell? No, Mike Farrell's the actor and Matt Farrell's the YouTuber. Okay. So if you look throughout the history of our human existence, you'll see all the things that we came up with. We either discovered them in physics or we invented the technology for them. So if you go left to right, top to bottom, you'll see the stuff that we've done. And it starts out from very primitive stuff like being able to create fire on demand, living in caves as opposed to out in the open. Some of this goes back a ways. But as you get farther and farther down, you get to things like understanding the value of scientific method and doing quality assessment, the transition from Earth-centered universe to sun-centered solar system. So I took communication as long-distance wireline communication and then wireless. And when you're doing wireless initially, it was just Morse code wireless. It wasn't actually voice or video. And then coming up with these things and just carry it farther and farther and farther. What's next? We're now down into the wireless communication, hypersonic aircraft. We're looking at fusion and photonic propulsion or whatever ilk you want to call it. And then we're looking at futures where we're now creating matter from energy. If you've seen some of the recent experiments where they basically bring photons together and they're creating muons from photons. So you're basically creating particles from light. And wherever anti-gravity winds up in that. So you just got to think that there's going to be more and more and more things that we discover in physics or create in technology. And what's the penultimate? What's the one that you don't need anything after you've got that? That's where I came up with interdimensional transportation, as it kind of solves a lot of problems. And once you understand how to deal with it, it should be pretty powerful stuff. But what you're going to need is infinitely faster computers. You need to be able to control forces in physics that we don't even know about yet. You need massive power generation to be able to generate and maintain these fields to manipulate physical space. And you need field generators and containments for them to be able to make these holes or portals on demand. It's kind of a penultimate paradigm shift. And if you remember the movie Forbidden Planet, you can understand how that can go wrong if handled inappropriately. So if you create the ability to do interdimensional transport and you plug that into the human brain directly where you can think about where you want to go, it might not do well. You probably want some kind of governing process or algorithm in there to make sure you don't go, I wonder if it would be nice to visit the sun. I was thinking of the sun. And then you just get vaporized. So think about it. So what is meant by this interdimensional transportation? If you took 2 points in space and you could join those 2 points with no space between them, no travel time. This is not a wormhole. This is not a tunnel. Think of it like you've grommeted together 2 pieces of space-time, and now you can just basically step from one to the other. For those not familiar with a grommet, they're those little brass rings that have sort of an innie and an outie, and you put them together, and then you press them together, and now it forms a hole. Think of those little things that you thread your shoelaces through on better quality better quality sneakers, where you have a little metal hole that you run the shoelace through, which makes the hole more durable. If you have cheaper sneakers, they just run it right through the material, and once you use the shoestring and it slices through the material, oh, how unfortunate for you. Time for you to pay us more money to buy more shoes. So,
What about the concept of the wrinkle in time, where if you took a sheet of paper and you folded it so that the opposite corners or diagonal corners were together?
So there was an episode of Stargate SG-1 where they were interacting with a very advanced race that can do this, just, open a portal and step through. And Daniel Jackson, Michael Shanks, was trying to, I think I know what you're talking about. This is, where you take 2 points in space-time and you just join them together. And this person with this advanced technology goes, no, it's nothing like that.
Okay.
So I had to put together, from the realm of science fiction, what it is or isn't like. So what it is like is, if you ever watch Star Trek The Next Generation, there's an episode called Contagion, where they introduced this advanced race called the Iconians. And they created this Iconian portal, or an icon portal. And it literally just looked like a rectangular opening in space. And on the other side of the opening, you could see other places and just step through. And so that was the first thing that came to mind, was that.
Oh, so the one that they would be almost like a zoo, like for each species, they would have like places where they could stay depending on the species.
Well, that's what's on the other side of the portal, is a planet. There was an episode of the original Star Trek series where they had a giant machine that would do that. It would connect you from the future, where the planet's about to be doomed, to a point in the past of the same planet where you might be able to survive. But the most recent one that came to mind was in the movie Doctor Strange. There's sling rings, where they just sort of make this swirly thing and a hole opens up with sort of gold sparkly thing around it, and then you just step through. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Not the sparkly ring, just the ability to have zero travel time between the 2 points. But there's a lot of things that need to be solved regarding how you would connect 2 points together. Not the physics of it, the side effects. We'll get to that. Or in the Marvel Avengers movie Infinity War, where he uses the space stone to just, like, he touches the stone, it opens a portal up, and he either steps forward or steps backward through it. But I think the most efficient one, and the most, I guess you could say, like this, is in the movie X-Men Days of Future Past, there is a mutant named Blink. And Blink just sort of sticks her hand out, and it opens this giant sort of plasma covered, not square or round, just sort of oddly shaped hole. And there's a number of demonstrations where things go through and the portal is opened elsewhere, not too far from you. So you can, if you want to move from this side of the room to that side of the room, you don't actually turn around and go back the other way. You go this way through a portal, and you come out the other side of the room in the portal. So that's probably the one that's going to work best as an analogy. And then what it is not. It's not a transporter. Your matter doesn't get disassembled, transferred as energy, and then reassembled. It's not a transporter. It's not a matter replicator, because we're not rearranging your material. We're actually creating a hole through space-time. It's not a warp drive, because those still traverse space. It's not a wormhole, because you don't go like swirling around inside the tube. It's not like the Star Trek Guardian of Forever. That's just funky ring, and you can step through it to any place on the other side in space or time. But the gate itself is always in a place. This is if you had two of those gates, a from gate and a to gate. It's not like Voyager's Borg transwarp conduits. Those are just wormholes. And if you've seen Doctor Who's TARDIS, it sounds good when he dematerializes and materializes, but then the next thing you see is the typical sci-fi movie wormhole effect, and this is not wormholes. It's not any form of chemical propulsion. Those still take time to travel. And it's not even nuclear propulsion, because that still takes time to travel. This is not faster than light. This is, the speed of light is no longer relevant. You just connect 2 points and step across. So if you have 2 points in space-time and you connect them together with zero distance between them, you can essentially create any size of interdimensional grommet or portal. I know it's currently impossible and there's no physics to support it, but this is just a thought experiment, so go with the flow for now, set practicality aside. I'm sure at some point we'll get back to it. So if you didn't understand the physics or the technology and you saw this happening, you would either chalk it up to science fiction, magic, or omnipotence. Like the Q. The Q can do this. The Q just goes and blinks out. He doesn't even need any fancy plasma portals. He's just gone. But why does he have to snap his fingers? If he's omnipotent, he can just think it. I guess that's for the video effect. But a lot of those things happen if you think about where we are today. If you took your mobile phone running your GPS mapping application and you went back to the 1800s and you showed that to a guy like Michael Faraday and said, looky what I can do, he would have no basis for understanding how all of that worked. He would say, I'm sure it's some form of electricity, but I don't know how it works, which is very much akin to what Captain America once said to Iron Man, which is, hey, go find out what's wrong with that panel. And he opens it up and he says, do you see it? He goes, it looks like it's based upon some form of electricity. So if you went back to that chart of all the advancements of our species and just went back up 5 rows and then said, okay, is what I'm showing you possible, achievable, practical? They would have no basis for the technology to understand how it works. They would just either chalk it up to magic or omnipotence. So set the presumption of impossibility to one side, and we're going to analyze, if we had this, how might it affect things? So the first thing you might say is, why are you including time? Don't you just want to move in space? What's time got to do with it? If you understand how GPS satellites work and the Doppler shift, given their 90 minutes, probably a little longer than 90 minutes orbital time around the Earth, there's a Doppler shift in their radio signal given how fast they're moving. So if you're moving instantaneously across enormous distances of space, there's a time factor there. It may not be immediate, but as we read down further, you'll understand it. So when you move through time, you also need to move through space. You can't just move through time. There's a lot of that in science fiction where somebody says, I went a day into the future. Poof, I'm here. Now, if you went a day into the future and you were at the same point in space, you would be out in space because the Earth isn't there anymore. It moved. So if you think you're standing still or sitting still, a fraction of a second from now, you will be a great many miles away from where you are now. Once you take into account the Earth rotation, the Earth orbiting the sun orbiting Milky Way, the sun bobbing up and down with its planets within the galactic plane of the Milky Way and Andromeda approaching each other, and our galactic cluster moving in the universe, and the universe is expanding. So if you want to move in space, you've got to think about time. And if you want to move in time, you've got to think about moving in space. So whenever you want to do this kind of stuff, the endpoints need to be considered from a space-time perspective. So why is this the penultimate invention? Why is there nothing more advanced after this? Because once you have this, interstellar transportation becomes instantaneous. Whether or not we're alone in the universe is easy. You just open a portal and go knocking on their door once you find out there's life on another planet. Or you can just send a probe to an exoplanet around another star and start doing monitoring, and you open a hole back to where you are, to get your signal back without having to wait for light years. So you never actually broke the light speed barrier. It just became irrelevant. If you want to transport people or material or natural resources, you just open a portal and shove it across. Immigration, migration of people and resources just becomes instantaneous, and we'll talk a bit more about control over it. If everything can be everywhere, what do exchange rates have to do with anything anymore? Everything can just be anywhere you need it, and the exchange rate becomes, well, I've already got it there. Why do I need to change its value? Communication can be instantaneous over interstellar distances. You open a portal on both sides, there's zero travel time of the photons that make up the radio waves. And in science fiction, you'll often hear of that as, we open a subspace portal or a subspace window to bridge the space-time continuum on a multi-parsec basis. In healthcare, surgical procedures become different. No more, if you have to remove something, cutting with knives. You don't have to stitch people up like garments, so to speak. If you need to provide water, food, and other resources, you just open a portal and provide it where it's needed. If you want to do weather control or prevent natural disasters, you just open the portal, connect it to, and do what you need to do. Disaster mitigation and recovery. If you need to move a bunch of people out of the way of something, you can do that. Or why don't you just move the threatening thing out of the way of the people? If somebody gets injured out in the middle of nowhere, you don't need to wait for a helicopter to take them to the hospital. You can just open a portal between there and the hospital, and they're immediately in the operating room. If you have to dispose of waste, you can just shove it into a portal, and on the other side can be the processing plant or the maw of the processing plant's processing machine. And many other such things are possible once you get in the mindset of, if you have this capability, everything you can do with it. But all of this is based upon mastery of just this one singular capability. So if you can think back to when computers first started to be everywhere, the fact that you could have cheap computational capability anywhere you needed it for a reasonable price, things changed. And now we have the Internet of Things, the IoT, where you might say, if I put a computer at a sensor, I don't need a computer that supports multiple sensors. I just put a computer at each sensor and connect them up to the internet. So I have the Internet of Things, where instead of thinking about people having 20 million personal computers, or there being 50 million mobile phones, you can talk about there being a billion Internet of Things sensors. So how do we connect the dots? Well, if you want to move something from here to there in space-time, you've got to have consideration for what are the parameters. Well, there's space and there's time. Well, in space, assuming you have some fractional, signed dimensional value of, I'm going to move from here. So I have an X, Y, and Z. Time is the same thing. You have a before time, after time, but then you have accelerations. How fast are you currently going in pitch, roll, and yaw? Oh, but then what's holding you back, or what's accelerating you? You have gravitational forces you have to calculate. So you have space, time, accelerations, and force vectors. So that's how you define one point. Now that we have 2 points, we want to connect the two of them together. But altering one point with another point may not be sufficient. There may be other things you have to take into account. So for people not understanding it, look, there's 2 points in space-time. What am I talking about? Well, if I do this, ta-da, that's all I'm talking about. Just basically joining 2 points in space-time. I know that was a lot for a very dumb animation. So nothing is ever simple. If you've got 2 points in space-time and you just say, well, I'm just going to change the x-coordinate and have these two overlap, you need to think about all those other things that are involved. Gravitational fields, pulling on things in different directions. So it may be that if you're just here and that one's there, there may be vectors that are torquing things in different directions, even though it's just that small a difference in space. So if you just change one property, you may find yourself in space or inside of some solid. So you have to take all of this information into account. And then there's time as things move around in space. Time is one of the things you have to think about. But even if you can do that, if you take all these parameters into account and say, I've now figured out everything about this point and everything about this point, and now I can just make the two of them the same. But there's other factors to think about. How about the environmental ones? Okay, let's say I want to move from the Earth to the moon. There's a gravitational change. Plus, I need a spacesuit. Air's a little thin up there. What about temperature? What if I'm just moving on the Earth from a tropic location to an Arctic location? Well, if you remember the movie Doctor Strange, when she showed him how to use the sling ring and took him to Mount Everest, it was a bit chilly there. He was not wearing anything warm, which gave him motivation to get that sling ring working and make your way back. So you have to think about the here versus the there and what's the difference. But what about atmospheric pressure? Imagine if you said, I'm going to open a portal from the surface of the Earth to 100 feet below the Atlantic Ocean. I think there's a very strong possibility a lot of very forceful water will be headed your way soon. Same thing holds true for wind, for difference in altitudes causing vacuums or wind flow in one direction versus the other. And then the atmospheric composition itself. If you go from a tolerable environment to a toxic one, let's say you wanted to skip the spacecraft and go from Earth to Titan, you better be in a suit before you do that. And what about the portal of the whole size? So far, we're only talking about 2 points, but a point has no dimension itself. You need to make a lot of points to create an aperture of sufficient size to make it worthwhile to do this. So you need the technology to create lots of points and essentially join a bunch of points together of specific dimension at specific points so you can transport things. How big a hole do you need? Well, I don't know. If you want to unclog an artery in somebody's heart, a series of very microscopic holes would be enough to say, let's get the fat out of there. So you can do arterial surgery very quickly without a lot of bother, and certainly with no instruments on the inside of the person, and certainly no surgical wounds of any kind. But let's say you wanted to move a person from point A to point B. Well, you have to have a hole big enough for the person. You don't want to leave any limbs back. And what if they were carrying something? Well, now it's got to be big enough for them and their luggage. What if you're bringing a family across? Well, it's got to be big enough for the whole family. What if you were moving a container, like one of those containers off those ships? Well, it's got to be big enough for that. And let's say you wanted to do a deep space probe. You need to be able to move the spacecraft between planets. So you might need a larger hole for the spacecraft. You might move more than the probe, because once you get over there, you might want to have some kind of spacecraft for local hops. Okay, here's the things that I thought of that once we go down through the list, you might think of some other ones. So if you had this capability that you could move between two arbitrary points in space-time, and you could move anything you wanted to, people, goods, services, what would you no longer need? Airlines. Wouldn't need any airlines. You want to go somewhere, just open a portal in your house, have that portal connect to a place in a hotel room, your hotel room in Las Vegas, and you're there. Trains, same thing. Ships, cruise ships. If you took a cruise ship that slowly got you there and eventually dropped you off at a port for a one-day jaunt on a Caribbean island, why don't you just go to the Caribbean island? I know, it's the cruise on the ship that you enjoy.
What about the buffet? It's better. I think cruise ships still going to go.
Well, that's what I was thinking. I think people would
It's
still
the
like
journey, not the destination.
Yes, for the journey. But we'll get to that as we get further down. A lot of the things that would be left would be much more expensive because very few people wanted to use them, but they use them for personal entertainment or pleasure and not so much for the use for which they were commercially created. But as I was looking over the Brightline rail system and its difficulties with getting rights of way and permits and payments to politicals and fees and such, as it was making its way up around Orlando, I said, you know, if you had a interdimensional portal, you wouldn't need any of that stuff. That stuff just gets in your way. But you also don't need taxis or Ubers or Lyfts or Waymos or buses or bus stations, trains or train stations, airlines or airports, ships or seaports. Just move point to point. Bicycle and jogging paths might still exist only for the pleasure of it or for exercise, not because you need to get it somewhere. So point-to-point deliveries. There's no freight trains, no big trucks, no local delivery trucks, no container ships. Hey, thankfully, no port delays. No FedEx, UPS, DHL, no USPS. I guess there's no reason for them to get it to the delivered to the wrong address anymore. But think about it for a moment. Amazon might be willing to spend billions to conquer and be the sole user of this technology. So you wouldn't have need for sidewalks unless you just wanted to walk somewhere for the pleasure of it, walk through a park. You wouldn't need any local roads, highways, or interstates. As a result of those falling by the wayside, the Earth might have the opportunity to get much more greener. Mining and drilling wouldn't be needed. You just use your ground penetrating radar to find the materials you want, and you just open a portal in the material bed and transfer it straight into the maw of the smelter. Supply chains would be immediate. Companies were always talking about minimal inventory, time to build down to zero, and this would be that, because you wouldn't maintain an inventory if you needed parts. You just open a portal with the parts supplier and they'll shove you some materials. No hauling delays. So if you're missing a part, you don't have to wait a day or 2 days or a week or 2 weeks or 6 weeks to get it. They could send it now. National borders would cease to be a control over anything, because if people can go anywhere, they can literally go anywhere across any boundary. Closed governments would be impossible. It's much like right now there's the consideration in China that we don't want no stinking SpaceX Starlink, because then people couldn't have their internet filtered. Anybody could just receive it and send up to the satellite, and now there's clandestine communication that they don't have a tap into it. That wouldn't go over well. You wouldn't need a hotel for business or vacation travel. At night, you would just go back home, sleep in your own bed. So the hotel would just be for meetings. But if we're already used to virtual meetings, why would you need the hotel for the meeting room or a convention center?
So I could go 1 week without cleaning the house.
Yeah. Restaurant dining would be for the served cuisine and the vista enjoyment. You wouldn't really go to a restaurant just to get food. Think of the Grubhub kind of thing that's happening now. People are eating at home, even if the food was prepared elsewhere. Well, you don't have to wait for Grubhub. You just open a portal between the restaurant and your dining room table, and they shove it onto your dining room table, and you've already paid for it with your credit card. So a lot of things go away. But since the food's deliverable, why would you need a restaurant? What you'd want is a food processing center that makes large quantities of different kinds of food, and you just order from there and they deliver directly off the conveyor belt. So instead of getting your TV dinner frozen, you'd get your TV dinner hot before it ever became frozen. So you'd save money on the electricity because you don't have to heat the food. The food would be heated as it's being prepared. But if that's the case, why would you ever need to go to a grocery store? If you run out of a particular item, just have it delivered by a portal. If you are preparing food in your home, you might be doing it strictly for the artisanal hobby. So if you want to have spices the way you want to have spices because you enjoy cooking, that may be your only reason for cooking. Those are all the, things that fall by the wayside. Here's the stuff that governments and groups concern themselves with: a loss of control. There are a lot of controls out there that people aren't aware of until you start considering what is it they're losing. So if literally you can transport anything from anywhere to anywhere, any time of day or night, without a record of having done so, enforcement agencies lose their control. They lose their minds, as the saying goes. If you just consider U.S. agencies, let's assume that today there are process violations that they can prosecute you for not going through the system. If you want to immigrate to the U.S. and you come across at a place not of their choosing, not using their process, they can arrest you, throw you in jail, and send you back home. But the moment you can say, I'm in Panama and I really don't like the life-threatening things that are going on here, I want to move to, Ohio. And you can just move to Ohio, even if you have to pay a fee for doing so. It's a lot safer and cheaper to do it that way. But ICE would have a problem with it because they're not in the loop. They can't go, you stay, you got to go, we don't like you. And, you didn't follow the process, so we're going to kick you out. That wouldn't be possible anymore. Think about transportation of illegal substances. If you declare something to be illegal, it can now be transported without any visibility into it having done so. The Drug Enforcement Agency and the state's attorney generals would lose their minds. International travel by criminals. Think if I wanted to flee a country, I could flee a country on a moment's notice, and the CIA, the FBI, and the State Department would have no control over it. So again, they lose their minds. Think of cybercrime. If you're trying to extract money from a bank, well, just open a portal to the bank vault and grab yourself some money and close the portal. How do they deal with that? That's kind of like transportation of goods across state lines. This is a favorite one of the FBI. We couldn't get you on you stealing the goods, but the moment you took the goods over state line without proper process, licensing, and taxes being paid, now we got you. Same thing at the international level. Oh, you didn't pay the customs duties. Well, the Treasury Department or the FBI are going to get you for that. What about interstate commerce across state lines? There's a group called the Interstate Commerce Commission. That's their bailiwick. And they have the FBI as their enforcement leverage. The unmonitored international transfer of large sums of cash. If you had $1 billion, you wouldn't have to put it on an Air Force cargo plane and then somehow lose it in Iraq. You could just transport point to point. Money laundering. You could just roll pallets of money between countries. The U.S. Postal Service has these things called postal inspectors. There's a lovely comedy out now where some women who are into coupons have fraudulently printed coupons that give you free copies of products, and the FBI tracks them down and arrests them using postal inspectors because the companies that produce the coupons don't want to enforce the regulations. They just want them to stop using them. But the postal inspectors are saying, no, that's interstate transfer via the U.S. mail service because you mailed the coupon. That's the postal inspector's job, and we can put you in the federal lockup for that. So crimes get prosecuted for want of other reasons by postal inspectors. Think about sales of liquor and cigarettes. You have those tax stamps. What if you could just transfer it between states without the tax stamps? Think of the sales tax revenue that would be lost. This level of capability would make federal controls over all of this stuff just impotent overnight without any resistance. So it's not like they could stop it. So maybe you want to not make this capability available to everyone immediately. Maybe you need some slow roll, some traceability on it.
Public centers.
That's what we're getting to. So if you don't want things like airports to go away immediately, maybe you use the airports as transport centers. So you go to an airport, and rather than boarding an airplane, you pay an airline-like company to transport you from, South Florida to Alaska instantaneously. So they would be responsible for covering the cost of the infrastructure and the equipment. You would be paying them for services rendered. But if all it is computers and energy, it may be a lot cheaper than all the infrastructure needed for all the aircraft they need to maintain. So you could think of it as their costs ought to go down. Why are you still paying $400 for your transportation ticket? So there could be midpoints, as all this stuff gets balanced and put through process. Once you have this sort of slow roll ability for the traceability, and the ability to trace things becomes, not just traceability, but also safety. What if they say, oh, you want to go from low altitude to high altitude? Well, we're going to implement a hyperbaric chamber between the 2 points. So you go in where the pressure is the same, and then we use it kind of like a waterway lock. So you go in the chamber gets sealed, and we slowly change the air pressure, and then the door on the other side opens up and you go out. So that would prevent disasters like you being sucked through a hole or you being blown through a hole. So these interim staging facilities might make sense, but how would you use it? Would you really need all the people that an airport needs? No, you just need your mobile phone. You queue up on your mobile phone, I need to transport, queue me up, and then you walk up to where the portal is and you say, hi, I'm here. The automated system opens the portal to your destination, you step across, and then the portal closes. So it'd be kind of like summoning a Waymo automated taxi kind of vehicle. You get in, you go someplace, you get out, and then you release the vehicle and it goes on its merry way to the next person. But if you can do that, why do you even need the mobile phone? Think about this for a moment. The omnipresent personal portal. If throughout your life,
So that's what he uses. He seems like godlike, but that's his transportation. That's the science of it.
yes, but how would you summon it? Well, if Neuralink doesn't exist yet, if Elon hasn't gotten Neuralink working, what you do is you open a portal that's always sitting right here on the edge of your ear, and it's big enough that it carries sound. So if it's always right there, and because we can move things in space-time, it's always following you around. If you remember from the original Dune, when Lady Jessica was walking around outside in the pouring down rain, there was this thing hovering above her head that lighted her path and covered her from the rain. Think of this on a very much smaller level. You have this thing that's always near you, always listening for commands, a la Alexa. And, if you said, okay, it's time for me to go to work, open the portal to my office, to actually my desk at the office, it would then take the command, coordinate that with all the other transports that are happening in your office building, open the portal, you step across, closes the portal. Or if you need anything, it could deliver it to you. And you would pay, a monthly service fee for this ability. So it'd be kind of like paying for a mobile phone, but there's no phone. There's no wireless communication infrastructure. It's just the portals. And it would look weird to have this portal just sitting there that nobody could hear what the computer on the other side is saying because the portal's right here at your ear, very low volume. It'd be kind of like the people that wear the deeply embedded earbuds that you don't know when they're on a call. They're just kind of talking to themselves, and then you realize, oh, I'm sorry, you're on a phone call. But if you had that, you wouldn't need mobile phones. But what you could do is say, I need a big screen display to show me something. Well, fine. Just ask for the computer to present it to you, and it'll open a portal right there to a big screen display 1,000 miles away, and we'll show you the data. And then once you're done with it, the portal would close. So you would open it up, see what you need to see at high resolution in full color, and then when you're done, make it go away. So you don't have to carry a phone around with a big ass display. Think about movies. If you wanted to see a movie, you wouldn't need a big screen TV at your house. You just need a big flat wall space. And you would open to a service provider a big screen, and then when you don't need it, the screen would go away and would just be a flat wall again. But you still might want to have delivered your hot, ready-made popcorn and beverages to where you're sitting in your comfy chair. But if you think about that concept for a moment, why would a building need windows anymore? You just create a portal to some appealing vista. But now you can not only see that beautiful scenery, you can also hear it. You can smell the ocean if if you're looking at something on the seashore. You can smell flowers in a field. So it's not only seeing and hearing, it's smelling. Smell-o-vision. So if you have all of this,
imagine what a terrorist could do. Let's say somebody with ill intent went into some government building and opened a portal to the deep ocean.
yes, and
Or to outer space.
that's why you want to slow roll it and not give it to everyone, and you want traceability and maybe some government oversight.
Yeah, but once the technology is out there, criminals will get the technology.
From the
Yes,
CIA.
that's why.
CIA,
That's why I refer to it as the penultimate technology.
Yeah.
Because if it works well and it gets slow rolled out, it could be the most fantastic thing that your society has ever witnessed. And if it goes wrong, poof, you could be out of existence in a heartbeat.
Yep.
So
Locks and security of any kind could become moot if it's not tightly controlled.
absolutely. And what was it that Spock said one time in the original series? Military secrets are the most fleeting of all.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's true.
Yeah. So let's say you did this with a slow roll and everything was reasonable. What benefits? What could you do with this stuff? Well, obviously, blood clots and tumors and cataracts and foreign bodies could be instantaneously removed down to the molecular level. Repairs and replacements for bone breaks and joint replacement, you just replace it. No surgery needed, no open wounds, no healing time, just swap it in, swap it out. Weather control, you just open a portal to rebalance environments. Too hot there? We'll open it more towards the Antarctic and balance the temperature for you. You could change a desert into a lush agricultural area by moving temperate air wherever you want it and by moving water wherever you need it. No more hurricanes. As soon as you saw the circulation starting, you could, let's just take some frigid Arctic air and dump it in the circulating air, and now no more hurricane before it ever becomes a hurricane, before it ever becomes a tropical storm. As long as you had control over it, wars would be pointless, because if soldiers showed up, you just move them elsewhere. If missiles started heading towards you, you just turn the missile back to where it came from. You'd have to come up with some kind of, as you said, defense from misuse.
If you're moving these large things like the temperate air from wherever it is into a desert, what replaces the temperate air from where you took it from? Is it a vacuum that's going to suck in? I mean, what kind of havoc would that create? You need
yin and yang. You need both sides. So if you're going to blow in a lot of cold air, that's going to displace the hot air, which is going to cause bad weather elsewhere. So when you blow the cold air in, you've got to be sucking the hot air out. So in the case of floods or tsunamis, you could just relocate the excess water just somewhere you might need it, like a desert. Oh, I don't know, maybe that dry lake out in western U.S. Immediate rescues would save countless lives. No more waiting for air evac or an ambulance. In the case of volcanoes, this is a recent one. In the case of volcanoes, just relocate the lava to a nice spot offshore and make some more land. And if you're concerned about the explosive forces and gases and ash, just open a portal above the volcano and send it somewhere else. You could send it directly onto the surface of water out in the middle of an ocean, because, you know, what's right side up? The portal doesn't care. Instantaneously, you could put out fires, so no more large-scale fires, because you just open a whole bunch of little holes to a water supply, and it would put rain wherever you wanted it, put out fires. If you still need a satellite in orbit, you just adjust the velocity vectors and plop the satellite into orbit. No rocket needed, thank you. You can instantly terraform planets and moons just by moving stuff from where it is to where you want it. And that includes habitats. So you'd build a habitat for Mars on Earth. You would drop the pressure in the chamber where the habitat is on Earth and just transfer it to Mars. And you now have a colony facility for Mars. So how would you moderate the shift to avoid disaster? You've got to think of all the industry, employment, economics, all of these side effects. You want it to be less disruptive. So you might want to carry out certain things on a gradual basis. You might want to start with something simple for which there's no life forms involved in case something goes awry. Think of our current issue with seaport delays. If you were to create a portal in China where they are sending the containers onto the freighters, and if you were open a portal in the Port of Los Angeles or San Diego where the containers are going to arrive, you could basically create a conveyor belt like thing that would just ship the containers point to point. But that's not what you really want. What you really want is a fixed platform where you have a crane that just reaches in, grabs the container, pulls it through, and deposits it wherever it needs to go. So it would go from portal to portal to portal. And you could have, you know, shipping companies that would do that, and you would pay the government for providing the service to do that. Kind of like, you know, when trucks drive on the road, that's an interstate highway, the trucking company didn't create the road. The company that made the truck didn't create the road. They just pay the highway use taxes as a means of covering some of the cost of maintaining the interstate highway system. Same sort of thing. But once you get that operating smoothly, the next thing would be air freight. But most air freight these days that is bulk is containerized. So it's just a next up step in moving containers. And then the next thing might be high volume commercial passenger transport. You could still do airports, but you just take everyone that's sitting in the waiting room for a particular destination and you transport them all in one shot to the destination. Instead of walking onto the gangway to get onto the plane, you walk on the gangway that takes you to the destination. No plane needed, no travel time needed. Think of how much money the airlines would save on, we don't have to give you free water and free soft drinks. Think of how much they'd save on, we don't have to show you no stinking in-flight movies because you're just there. They'll just take all that money and, you know, pocket it and still want to charge you more for the fact that this is advanced technology. So maybe you'd still want to have bus stops and bus stations as places where you might have predefined locations where portals would come into existence. So you might have to walk down to the end of the block to catch the portal like you catch the bus. But there's always going to be resistance to change. So whenever something like this shows up and those in control or in power start to realize what they're going to lose, be it government, political, financial, or religious, they're going to come out with things like, it's unsafe. Think of the current complaints against Tesla autonomous driving vehicles. They're unsafe. They're going to kill people. Well, I think the statistics currently show that they're safer than people behind the wheel. They're unreliable. How often do you get things delivered to your address from the U.S. Postal Service where that's not my address, that's not me, and then you have to send it back around again to get it delivered correctly? Well, if you can open a portal and you go, is that where we're supposed to be? Yes, it's kind of impractical to deliver to the wrong address. Well, it's unholy because there's no reference to it in dogma. They referenced, don't eat pork, but nothing about interdimensional transport. So it must be the work of the devil. It's amoral, allowing just anybody to go anywhere they want. Think of the immigration issues we have nowadays with, you're going to let those people in? Well, they can go anywhere now. So those people are going to lose their stuff. Or it just, given the absence of control, one group says, well, I only want us being able to do it. I don't want them to be able to do it. So it may be a political issue. We must stop this. We must prevent it from happening. But these are all resistance to paradigm shifts. And when you think about it, those don't work well. The moment that, you find that, hey, there's big money to be made. Hey, there's more revenue from more people needing these services. There's too much new money. There's too many that are going to benefit, and therefore those that get in the way will be made irrelevant. So think of these as, what were the previous paradigm shifts? Computers. I watched them go from that thick revenue stream of mainframes that you could only lease, from mainframes that you could only lease down to mini computers. And I was seeing mini computers as they'll never get any smaller. And then personal computers came out. Well, you'll never have them personal. And then phones and tablets came out, because that way you could sell multiple per person and everyone would want them, and it would be cheap enough that everyone can have one. When personal computers first started out, those were hobbyist computers. You would buy them as a kit and solder them and put them together yourself. And then it became, okay, now you can plug in cards like an Apple II. You buy an Apple II and you just buy cards and plug in. And nowadays you saw the Raspberry Pi Zero W. It's just a single board computer and you plug add-ons onto it. GPS, knowing where things are. It started out as, well, only the military has this. And then handheld receivers, dedicated handheld receivers. And then it became, well, we're just going to add that to the computer. And now it's, would you buy a mobile phone that didn't have a GPS receiver in it? No, of course not. Manufacturing. You used to have dedicated manufacturing plants for your prototypes. Well, now you can, have a personal CNC machine or a personal 3D printer and make prototypes yourself. And then once you figure out you need 1 million of them, then you can send it back to the manufacturing company. So the manufacturing company isn't making all the gravy for tools set up that you only wanted 12 of them made. But if you look at how that's happening at a larger scale, when Tesla sets up an auto manufacturing plant, they consider the first few hundred cars that roll off the assembly line as prototypes. And if they make a bad decision, they'll actually discard dozens to hundreds of those vehicles as, well, the process was wrong and we couldn't correct them, so we just scrapped them. Maybe disassemble the parts for repair parts, maybe just scrap them or crush them and destroy them so nobody makes use of them. Kind of like the early GM vehicles, where GM didn't want anybody else learning about electric vehicles, so they took your car back and crushed them. Rocket engines. If you look back in the early days of rocket engines, that was a huge manufacturing complex to make those. Well, Tesla 3D prints their own metal rocket engines, and they're mostly one giant part now. so you don't have to make a bunch of different metal parts and bolt them all together and test them out. The bolt, the flange connection is just gone. It's just a pipe that connects. Renewable energy production. You used to have to build these giant power plants or hydroelectric dams, and nowadays it's, you put up some windmills and some solar panels and you have electricity, because they're looking at the green of it. And I don't mean the environmental green, I mean the money green. We can still charge you the same rate for your electricity, and we don't have to pay for fuel. We don't have to pay for the trucks to deliver the fuel. We don't have to pay for the pipelines to be built to get the fuel to the plant that generates the electricity. We just put out the solar cells, put out the batteries, and voila, power. Interdimensional transportation will be another one of these paradigm shifts. And I'm thinking, if you can mull it over and get back to me and think of what would be the next penultimate shift once you have the ability to do interdimensional travel. Think of the commerce opportunities. Well, somebody's going to set up services that would do this for you on a flat rate or unlimited basis, much like your mobile phone. So if you said, I can make use of 20 transports per day for moving any sorts of goods or services or people, and I paid $200 a month for that service, there's a lot of people that would pay that. But if you think of, if there's 5 billion users of this capability planet-wide, and they all paid roughly $200 a month, that's $1 trillion a month in gross revenue. What company wouldn't spend a few $1 billion to develop the technology to do that? Because even if they only made $500 billion per month, that's 500 billion. So they would recoup their costs rather quickly. So spend a little for long-term gain. There are a number of things that are receiving funding money, like fusion power, dark matter, dark energy, quantum computers, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, electromagnetic drives, impulse drives, warp drives. All this stuff is receiving big sums of money for a payoff that's going to be decades away, if ever. Maybe, maybe not. So maybe this is not so far-fetched. Start spending a small amount of money, maybe a few $100,000 to begin with, reaching to a few $1 million once you start to see some physics progress on it. It's kind of like some of those manufacturing techniques that they develop and go, well, right now it's costing you $800 per chicken nugget to make synthetic chicken nuggets from chicken animal tissue, but someday we're going to get the cost down. Well, if you could transfer a thimble from any place on Earth to any place on Earth and have it arrive intact, and it only cost you a few $1 million to get that capability, that would be a good indicator. But until you spend the money, you're never going to get there. And we will need this ultimately someday to save ourselves. So if an asteroid is approaching and we didn't see it because it came from the direction of the sun, we could just direct the asteroid elsewhere. Maybe end it by sending it on a terminal solar trajectory to go burn up in the sun. Think about this for a moment. As the sun starts to run out of its hydrogen fuel, we locate a distant gas giant planet and we tap into it as a hydrogen fuel source, and we, over a long period of time, drain off that Jovian-sized planet's hydrogen supply towards our sun to give it more fuel. Maybe every 1 million years you could add another 1 billion years onto the lifespan of the sun. This actually occurs in nature. If you look at some of the white dwarfs that have a red supergiant near them, they suck matter off the red supergiant, building it up as a crust on the surface of the white dwarf. Eventually it collapses in and you get a nova effect. You don't want that, but drain it off even slower. and you could replenish a star. That would be interesting. So after we have this capability, what else would come next? Well, maybe we should add this as a new parameter to the Drake equation, because if you were to use this improperly just once or roll it out too expeditiously, it might spell the end of a civilization. And the Drake equation includes a parameter for nuclear weapons in that same category. If you discover nuclear fission and you don't deal with it properly as a civilization, you can end your days in a nuclear war. So what's the probability you're going to go poof because of fission? What's the probability you're going to go poof because of interdimensional transportation and somebody opens a portal to the wrong place and wipes out a planet or wipes out a large part of the population of a planet? So maybe it needs to be a factor in the Drake equation. Or because you need so much energy to do this, maybe it goes in the energy harvesting equation. There's another equation besides the Drake equation that's the energy harvesting equation. What identifies the level of sophistication of an extraterrestrial species? And one of those is having the technology to gather all of the energy from your parent star. And they do that with something called a Dyson sphere. Well, this might be, you need that much energy in order to do this. So you need a Dyson sphere to create the ability to have the power to do interdimensional transportation. So you may want to put this on the energy harvesting equation. Or maybe we need a whole new parameter or equation that's for transportation, because paradigm shifts occur when you can do things like, we got rid of horses and buggies and now we've got cars. That was a pretty big shift. I had to put out all the gas stations out there. I had to change all the supply lines, had to develop better tires. There's a whole lot of paradigm shifts that occurred simply because we switched from horses to motorized transport, or when prop airplanes were exchanged out for jet airplanes. And now we're talking about transonic airplanes. So put all those on a chart of transportation advancements, and what's the penultimate transportation advancement? It would be kind of like discovering fission and then it going wrong. And should you think this is only a fantasy, I've got news for you. There are large groups that are already thinking along these lines. I didn't suggest it to them. I went out and researched it, and they're already doing it. There's a presentation by Northrop Grumman, the guys that make those military industrial products like military stuff and space capsules. Here's a presentation by Northrop Grumman on, do doors to interdimensional travel exist? Yeah, so the guys with the money, the multi-billion-dollar large-scale corporations, they're already thinking about this stuff. It may not happen anytime soon, but if they have certain physics breakthroughs, it could happen much faster. And then I thought this was interesting. Opening strange portals in physics. There was actually an article in the Smithsonian magazine, and it was not on their April Fool's Day issue. So if you think of how many trillions of business dollars could be made if you had this capability exclusively or had to share it with others, it may be worth it for a company like an Amazon to spend billions of dollars to invest in making sure that they're the only one that gets this first. But let's hope that it's not simple. Let's hope that it's not so simple that some garage hobbyist suddenly opens a hole from sea level to ocean floor, and or to a high mountain, or a subsurface lava pool, or the vacuum of space, or the sun, and then we have big problems before you ever know anybody had the capability. Kind of like 3D printers. The first guys over in Europe that created the first 3D printer thought it was really great. until, people started doing things like, I'm going to print a gun. So in conclusion, I know that right now, absolutely positively, we don't have the technologies to do this. But someday, and there are apparently already people working along those lines, how soon they'll have something, I don't know. And I do realize that if this capability were unleashed too quickly, that havoc is likely to ensue. And I also realize that if it's done right, it could be the savior for a species. If it's done wrong, it could be the doom for a species. But here's a thought. You remember me talking a few weeks ago about a society having an indicator that says, you've just signaled it's time for us to pay attention to you, to have you do your first contact with us, to join the family. Well, maybe if you do this, this is the signal that says, hey, we can arrive next Thursday, and we're going to arrive next Thursday by interdimensional transportation. What spaceships? We don't need those silly spaceships.
We will be above the visitors.
Yes, the visitor will just pop into the NSA headquarters and say, you got this guy out in his garage in Omaha that just invented something. I think you want to pay attention to it. So if you wanted the references to what I think the technology is, there's some of those. And you know about me. And thanks for watching.
Oh, that was wonderful, really interesting. Love it.
Yeah, I loved all the pluses and minuses, all the disruptive technology. When I was in middle school, I took a course called Dynamics of Change. And there was this book that explained as technology moves forward, the only change you have to be concerned with is that change will occur. And it will not occur in a manner that you're ready for it. You will have to basically run fast to get up to speed with it. And if you can master the ability to accommodate change, you can make use of change. But if you're unable to realize that change is here and you have to accommodate it because resistance is futile, you're always going to be on the back end of change, and it's always going to be distressing for you. I accommodate change.
Yeah, this that you wrote for people who like to write novels or do, structure movies, and
they like to write trilogies. Yes,
the screenplay. This is like a good rule book of what could happen. That's very nice, like for people who's more creative, who likes to do that. This would be like almost like a manual how to write down that kind of reality when that happens. That was very interesting. And if anybody who was listening to the YouTube video later who likes to write his story, this is really good.
So I took a look at the administrative level information for the YouTube site. I found that the EM Drive presentation has been viewed in its entirety 27 times.
Okay, that's good.
So even though I did not check the box to say I want to monetize this website, it's getting found, maybe through search engines. Maybe it pops up on YouTube if I just say, go find EM Drive stuff. And then somebody finds, and a lot of people watch the 3-hour-long version. So then we're listening to all of our BS in addition to the EM Drive stuff. So I think once I put this one out there, and the title of it is Interdimensional Transportation, that might draw some.
This is a clickbait indeed.
Yes, it's YouTube baiting. Yes.
Yes. So you know that what's the name of the director that you gave me? Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks' son is the one who wrote the handbook for zombies. I hate zombies,
Yes.
but I know about him because
Yes.
he makes like the rules of the zombies. There are people who write the rules for vampires or for, rules for teleportations, like follow the rules to make a little bit more sense and actually not also to bug the fans, like making like big errors of, like, so this presentation is really good because it's almost like a handbook for people who want to write down something like that. This is really good. You should copyright that one.
Well, you don't have to copyright something if you post it on YouTube for general public consumption. It has a date timestamp, and people have watched, once you have viewers watching it, that becomes your evidence point as to, I don't need a patent or a copyright. I am the first to make it publicly accessible historically. Now, if you want to come in afterwards and try and copyright it, I can take you to court and say, you were not the first. And people have lost lawsuits along those lines. So the internet is a great place for sort of putting a stamp in the ground. But what I really wanted to come out of this particular presentation is not the interdimensional travel matter-of-fact concept. It's when disruptive change comes in, it will show up with no warning. It will not show up with an instruction manual as to how you're supposed to cope with it. And if you try and resist it because it removes your controls, you're the one that's going to be most disrupted by it. So if you look at, for example, electric vehicles, the entrenched manufacturers that aren't throwing everything into electric vehicles, they're the ones that are going to go broke the fastest. They're the ones that are going to cost tens of thousands of jobs. And even the early adopters, even the Teslas of the world, stand the risk that if something newer comes along and they do not adopt it, they do not embrace it, they could be on the junk pile of history too. So if, for example, some new battery technology comes along where you can store 10 times the amount of energy in 1/10 the space, cars would get thousands of pounds lighter. It would take less materials. It would take less time to build them. Those are all advantages over even what Tesla's got today that the likes of a Ford, a GM, or a Stellantis, Chrysler, Dodge could pick up if they were willing to do so. But so far, they've been unwilling to do so. They just want to ride the money train and not change their concepts, not build things in-house, still outsource everything. Learn that change can happen when you least expect it. Learn to recognize what has the potential for change as a result of that, and then learn whether you're going to be on the upside or the downside of it. If you're going to be on the downside of it, flip over to the upside of it, or find a new marketplace. Get out of that business because you're about to be trounced. That's just how things are going to go in the future.
Yep.
And in my short lifetime, I've seen so many changes.
Yeah.
Like from having like this little computer that I can bring everywhere, or a huge desktop that has like a fraction of its memory and speed.
Yeah.
It's like incredible. I was talking with my friends with a dial phone and my mom screamed at me to let the phone go, and now I have that in my pocket. So it's like, it's amazing. This when I was watching Star Trek, when the reruns of Star Trek, because I watched the reruns, I didn't watch the original.
Uh-huh.
So when I watched that, this was things for Star Trek. It wasn't, not even in the helm of the thought.
Well, the people that did the technology for Star Trek, the original series, they considered a wireless communication device that can only communicate voice and no data as being extremely advanced. And then we took that and said, why just voice? Why not data? And if you think about phones started out as a brick, and then they became a flip phone, and the flip phone was a natural outcoming of the Star Trek communicator. But then people said, "Oh, flip phone, that costs money to make those that way. How about we just
And
make
they
a
don't
flat
break
panel?
that easily.
Yeah, how about we just make a flat panel?
Now
Oh,
it's gonna break.
that makes the phones even cheaper. So if you were to go back and look at the margin that Motorola made on the first flip phones, that was back when flip phones were $400. They were probably making
love that
$200
rate.
on every flip phone, which is how Motorola came to be as big as they were. Nowadays, you've got Apple and Samsung. Every time they come out with a new product and they remove a capability, like how much money do you think the cost to produce an iPhone went away, made it cheaper because it no longer had that stinking headphone jack on it? Well, they already had the Bluetooth in there. That made the phone cheaper, but you had to pay more for it for the absence of the jack. Look at what Apple did this week with their 2 new models of Macintosh laptops. They came out with 2 models. They found this from the phones. They don't call it an entry-level model. They just call it the regular model and then the Pro model. The Pro model costs a lot more. So a few years ago, Apple removed most of the connectors from the outside of the laptops. And they just gave you a Thunderbolt connector, and then you had to buy Apple proprietary external adapters to adapt like Thunderbolt to HDMI so you could connect up to TV or a screen in a meeting room. That was Apple reducing the cost of their laptop while at the same time charging you more for the adapter than the connector in the laptop originally cost. Cost more plus options, more revenue for existing technology. So it's kind of a joke that if you look at the latest MacBook, it doesn't have all these jacks on it. But if you want the MacBook Pro, which costs you more money, they put all the jacks back on it because they received too many complaints from business users that, I'm sorry, we just can't use, we can't use Macintosh computers anymore because how do we hook it up to an HDMI display? So they reversed course and put USB and HDMI connectors back on the MacBook Pro, which makes the laptop even more expensive, and they don't sell the adapter anymore. Well, they still need to sell the adapter for the non-Pro version, but people that buy the non-Pro version don't need the adapter because they didn't need it to begin with. They just buy the Pro version. So instead of you spending $50 more to get your HDMI adapter from Apple, you might spend $400 more to buy the Pro version of your laptop. That's good marketing. Anyway, hey, we came in early tonight. So I don't have a topic for next week, so I'll have to be creative and think of something.
I posted a video on my Facebook. There's 2 things there they coming this week. It's a guy who make a monolithic Schmidt Cassegrain, very tiny one that can be connected to many telescopes and make a larger telescope. So the size of the telescope will be the size of one eyepiece. I posted on my Facebook page to give ideas. I posted there so I remember, just to tell you.
I saw that video and I was fascinated by it right up until he makes them only by hand, and he can only make one of them about every 2 weeks if he wants to make the good one.
It's basic Monroe proof of concept. He's an optical
engineer. Oh, no. He makes them professionally.
Yeah.
He makes them for educational research projects for satellites. So if you're a high school or a college and you've created a 1U CubeSat and you want to put a telescope on your 1U CubeSat, it's okay for it to be 70 millimeters in diameter for your telescope, because when the telescope is that short, I mean, it's literally, less than an inch deep.
I found it very clever. It was
when your focal
clever.
length is that shallow, and you've got essentially a Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope, the light gathering ability is like f1.2.
But it was super clever, and you can put
Oh,
a more than one.
Oh yeah,
You know, you can basic inside of a box. You can
Yep.
make a huge interferometer with the size that would be a 10-inch telescope and a super lighter. That's super clever.
I was a little disappointed by the accuracy of his grinding. He was using all analog manual tools for discerning whether it was ground accurately enough. And I think every time he makes one, the focal ratio comes out as a different number. He grinds it until it's as perfect as he can make it, and then he determines the focal ratio for it based upon how much glass he had to remove.
Sure,
Because
it's totally artisanal.
Yes, it's totally artisanal. But then I thought, well, with what I know about the ion beam etching device at University of Berkeley in California, they could make these things easily.
Yeah,
They would just
but the clever is the idea to make a monolithic.
yes.
That is like I never even thought about it. That's like, you know, the first time you put the egg standing up. Oh, it's so easy. You just broke the bottom of the egg, but nobody thought about before. So that's just like, I love those things, like this great idea that is so simple. It's in your face, but nobody thought about it.
Yeah.
I love that.
And that will be a great artisanal device right up until nonlinear optics replaces all of the glass in the mirrors.
Yeah.
You just change the index. You just change the index of refraction of a coating on a surface of a glass, and you can change the magnification any way you want.
Yeah. So the other thing that I post here is a new paper that is being published already. And then there is a YouTuber who actually commented. He's probably has a degree in astronomy because he comments in the well, you know, done form. He actually read the paper and explained the paper. It's about the huge magnetic tunnels that seem to be surround the solar system. So we thought that would be like streams coming up from the Milky Way, from distortions of stars or streams of gas, and basic is actually impression that we have because of the position we are on the Milky Way. So that one was a very nice article that you could, you know, do something. And then the other thing that's not related to physics or astronomy is I found this lady super courageous, and it's like good if you want to do something like a peer review comment, because it's like, oh, science corrects itself, but how it corrects itself, you need to do the peer review. But who's financing peer review? Nobody. So most of the people who read the paper and who correct things and who actually go to look for a research thing, those people are not remunerated because they do in their own time, and they have in a huge risk to be sued. And normally they have like public employee jobs, and if they're sued, they are ruined because, you know, they make a small salary. They are not rich. They don't have institutions behind them. So I actually posted this lady. She's a French lady, and she reads the paper. So her nickname is Data's Loot, and she challenged a powerful COVID scientist. But the comment's not basic because she reads paper about biology because that's her area. But the article that I published from BuzzFeed News, it's not just interesting because of the area that she's commenting and all the lies that people talk about vaccines or the COVID, and the cause a lot of death because of misinformation. So she does that. But what I took from the article is not just the area of the biological science that she is basic people who are actually reading papers from other people. Those people are in a huge risk because they're like, if I read something in the area of medicine or some comment some new drug or something, I could be sued. I have no money to be sued, you know. It's so I could be ruined to actually do peer review. So the risk that people who does peer review to be sued is like the huge risk that people actually do it. So they are the real people who actually make the science correct itself, the science go forward. So it's like it's amazing what she does. So I posted that on my Facebook page, and we could actually look for something like not just on the area of medicine, but like in general in science to you know see the peril that people who does peer review suffers.
Well, there is liability insurance that she could buy to help her out, but how much liability insurance do you buy? $1 million, $1 billion? Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, it could be $1 billion because you're actually, you know, doing peer review from multinationals who have like, you know, they have billions of dollars in just lawyers, and they could ruin you forever.
Yep. When I come out with a medical device interoperability standard profile, and I want to release that to the public, I have to go through an individual that reads over the document, and she reads a lot of different medical devices. So she doesn't know just about physiologic monitors. She knows infusion pumps and ventilators, and she knows a broad level of things, just not to that much detail. So she understands these things, and when she reviews it, that's what we're looking for out of her, is just her level of experience to find the duh stuff. Because we've been reading it and reading it and editing it and reading it, and it just gets to be, you get to be blind to it after a while. So if you're a scientist,
whenever you write something, you cannot see your errors. Like whenever I write something scientific, I always ask for someone to actually review for me, because in the middle of a road, it will be someone who called me, or music was playing like in the middle of the text, and I'm gonna read that text 10 times and I will not see the error.
You get used to the error.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. It's not just spell checking and grammar checking. It's scientific evidence checking. The spell checking and the grammar checking, their automated stuff are doing that. But listing in the footnotes where you got the data from, and then validating and corroborating your data sources, that takes a lot of work.
Oh,
Yes.
it is. Yeah.
So that what I found that interesting. That could be a good presentation. So that
So I didn't go over the detail of it, but I saw the guy's article on our solar system is sitting inside of a giant magnetic bubble.
That one was cool.
And I thought, I'm going to wait until somebody else takes a look at it and comments on it.
They just printed. They was
I know
just
it's
published,
interesting,
so it's
and at this point, scientifically, that would be considered a postulate,
yes,
and that's fine. So I put a push pin in it, and I come back and look at it later.
yes. Probably next year will be awesome to comment, because you will have papers based on that idea to prove. Because while we are commenting on it, is that one astronomer, a lady, she wrote a paper, and she did a computer simulation of whatever you see around us. And then she notices by the magnetic fields that you could see in the dust, that it seems that the solar system is going through a tunnel of dust. And what we interpret to be features of the Milky Way, it's actually features that are close by to us that gives us the impression that we are in a tunnel with the, kind of. So it was interesting to read up. And the kid who I posted a video on my Facebook page, he explains really good.
Well, the sun, combined with all of the planets in the solar system and asteroids and Kuiper belt objects and all that stuff, that's not an enormous amount of matter in the vastness of the universe, but it is enormous concentration of matter in a small thing that is a solar system. Given that concentration of matter and the energy output of the sun, it can be producing fields that will affect interstellar space. So much like the solar wind gets bent around the Earth's magnetic field, it could be that the interstellar particle field is bent around the magnetic bubble of our solar system. But how are you ever going to see that?
And we are in a spur.
Yeah.
And our solar system is in a spur, you know.
Yeah. How are you ever going to see that? The only way you're ever going to see that is to go outside and measure the difference.
Right.
So
And we
maybe,
cannot. We are stuck inside.
well, maybe if the Voyager probes last another 10 years, they'll get far enough out to see the edge or to see a transition. And then we can make statements like that.
Yeah. It was cool stuff. But
Oh yeah.
this was a fun presentation.
Yeah.
The more you learn, the more you want to learn. That's good.
Yeah, and then it was cool because basically you're prime us to watch Dune because that's what they do.
Yes. Yes. Well,
But
I
you're talking
don't know
about
that.
energy, and they're doing with spice melange.
Yes, I don't know that you need an orange slice to do it. It was always funny that spice melange was orange, like as if it was Tang. Yeah. That doesn't look like the spice melange. That looks like the tangerine melange.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah.
But
See,
what I post on Facebook was it was cinnamon. It was the chemical, the big one that I put with cinnamon, is spice. But then I was thinking about spice also that we talk about is capsaicin from the peppers.
The pepper,
And
yeah.
then if I'm going to talk about capsaicin, I have to talk about the two spices that I use more. One is theobromine, chocolate, and the other one is caffeine, coffee. So.
and what is the spice that's actually called spice?
Cinnamon?
No.
No?
There is a spice called allspice.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's like a little round, a tiny nutmeg.
But that's a spice called spice.
Yes,
Yeah, that's
and
weird.
it makes no sense. I have no idea what it is. I have to look the translation to see if that is equivalent in Portuguese, because
Latin is
what
always
all
helpful. Latin.
Huh?
The Latin translation is helpful. That tells you
Yes,
more.
Yeah.
yes.
Mm.
Especially because I think who brought all spices to all over the world was the Dutch company, and they had another name for it.
Yeah.
Allspice. I met allspice here, United States, because I never put anything like that in my food. Allspice? I don't remember what is it.
It comes probably from Indonesia
Yes.
originally.
Well, I know it gets ground up into a powder, and that's how
Right.
you buy it in the store. You buy it in a little shaker powder.
Yeah, I actually have it, but I never used it. I think I had a recipe for cake, and I used one time. I
Yep.
probably should throw away.
Mm.
Anyway, so
It's Wednesday. Next week is the first one, and Manuela,
Yes.
whenever you're available,
I
I'm
have
good
this
for you.
week is pretty busy, but then from then on.
Whenever, because
I'll
this
be
is
in
going to
touch
stay
with
on the
you.
movie theater for a month. So
Oh
we
yes,
can-
I have to educate myself in this field.
Yes. So whenever you want to go, find a movie theater near you or
Sure.
something, we can
Yeah,
meet
I
up.
do. So can you
So
really
I
stand
leave the
to see
house.
it? Can you stand to see it in 2 dimensions instead of 3?
I watch TV. I watch stuff on my phone, so I have no problem. Sometimes I'm too lazy to turn on the computer. I watch stuff on the phone and I go to sleep with the phone. I don't even have TV. I only watch TV on the computer or on the phone.
Oh, well, that works.
But my mom is coming, so I'm gonna have to buy a TV again. Whenever she goes, I
When's she
give
gonna be
away.
here? When's she gonna be here?
The end of November, she's gonna arrive.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll have to plan. We'll have to plan some places to go.
Right.
Yes. Whenever she arrives, I buy TV again because I never watch. And then when she goes away, I sell the TV or I give the TV.
Well, if she comes, I have to collect already this, what's it called again in Portuguese? The fruit I have.
Nakajano.
I'm collecting already my freezer for her.
Okay.
So what size TV do you normally buy?
Sapote.
Blanco.
Yes. But I prefer the chocolate sapote.
Right.
Many tried the thing, you swear you're eating pudding. It is amazing.
Well, and this one too, it's pretty much the same. This year I had wonderful ones. They were the best.
Okay, good.
So
Nice
I froze them for her.
Oh, thank you.